Hello and welcome to the Outsourced Accountant September webinar series. This month we're talking about winning the talent game, which is about keys to attracting and retaining great staff. Joining me this month is our Chief of People for the Outsourced Accountant, Kerry Brown. Kerry's got an extensive background in HR, and I'll get her to talk a little bit about herself in a second, but just introducing myself, Nick Sinclair, the CEO of the Outsourced Accountant. You'll see on screen now my contact details, so if you have any questions that don't get answered today, please feel free to reach out to me on social media. And moving right into Kerry. So Kerry, do you want to just give us a quick background about yourself and your experience in managing people?
Absolutely. Hi everyone, Kerry Brown here. Really pleased to be able to join you all today. So I have worked in the HR space for a little over the last 20 years and have worked across a wide variety of industry groups during that time. So from working in some of the big global FMCG companies like Colgate-Palmolive and George Weston Foods, and then moving into the kind of startup fintech environment as the head of people and culture at Nimble before joining the Outsourced Accountant about 5 months ago in the Chief of People role. So, you know, I feel like I have seen a wide variety of people and people issues across that time, and really looking forward to sharing some of my insights around the recruitment market, and particularly as it relates to bringing people on board in an offshoring situation with the Outsourced Accountant today.
Wonderful, thanks Kerry. It's great to have you on this month's webinar and really look forward to getting some insights from you very soon. But before we do get started, we're just going to run a quick poll. We've got a bit over 120 accountants or firms on this webinar today, and we just wanted to find out, what are your firm's biggest recruitment challenges? Is it lack of candidates? Is it lack of candidates with the right skills? Is it salaries that they're demanding, recruiting inefficiencies, or is it your firm's image is not that attractive to get the right type of talent? So we might just pop that poll up and we'll see how we go with the answers on that. So we'll just give everyone about a minute to respond. So you'll see that pop up and you'll be able to respond to that. So the results coming through at the moment, we're seeing about 70% are saying the lack of candidates with the right skills. Salary negotiations is also the next highest, and then we've got lack of candidates and recruiting inefficiencies, and only a very small amount of people saying that their firm's image is not that attractive. And we're going to talk about that one a little bit more throughout this webinar, because a lot of firms probably don't realise what a lot of the Generation X and Y are actually looking for when they are looking for a firm. So that while you may think your firm's image is attractive to the right talent, it may not be. So we'll talk about that. We might just close that poll off now, but resounding, 80% of people are saying lack of candidates with the right skills, which is a very interesting. Kerry, is any of that surprise you with the results? Lack of candidates with the right skills, salaries, recruiting inefficiency?
No, that really aligns with the kind of experience that we're having at the moment, some of the feedback that we are seeing from clients, and it does lead into some good discussion about that whole area of lack of candidates with the right skills, and some tips that I think that we can share around people just managing their expectations and going into a recruitment process with a really open mind. So we can talk about that in a lot more detail.
Excellent. So we'll move into the talent shortages and the impact, and it's really around what we're talking about here is the accountant's perspectives and changes in the accounting landscape, and why we're really having these challenges. And a lot of it is around the globalisation. We're seeing the shortfall of candidates, particularly in the markets we're operating in Australia, New Zealand, and the US and UK. The firms that we're working with are constantly telling us that it is really difficult to find strong talent in local markets. But also it's about retaining that talent once you've trained them to be to the level that you want them to be. We're seeing globalisation play a part of this, and obviously we are an outsourcing and offshoring provider, and we're seeing the growth, particularly in our business and our industry. It's phenomenal, the speed of growth, and globalisation is about getting the right talent at the right cost in the right location, and being able to get the right people to do the right processes as part of that role of the accounting, which is done, a lot of it done locally. We're seeing Asia as a booming market for offshoring. We are really seeing domestic skill shortages. It's becoming harder and harder to get the right type of talent with the right skills. I mean, that was, 70% of you said lack of candidates with the right skills. That's the feedback we're getting on a daily basis. Our sales and account management team are talking to over 80 accounting firms a week. And this is, again, something that's just constantly told to us on a daily basis that, we can find lots of people apply for the job, but not the right people with the right skills. And then the second thing that we're getting told from accounting firms, which we're not even really covering off today, is how do you actually keep that talent? Because Generation X and Y have different mindsets. They have different thoughts about their long-term careers, which we're going to be talking a lot about today. We are also seeing a large movement of onshore roles being moved offshore, particularly with our business. We're growing over 100% a year. We're certainly seeing this with the firms. But the one thing that's interesting is that all of our clients, I would say 95% of our clients, are growing both their teams onshore in Australia and offshore, particularly in the Philippines with us. But the one thing that we do notice is the type of employee that they're recruiting in Australia is different to what firms that are not offshoring are recruiting. Ones that our clients are recruiting a higher level, they're people that they're fast tracking into more client-facing and advisory, well, not necessarily just advisory, but more client-facing work. So we're seeing a lot of the firms that are not offshoring are still trying to recruit graduates, and they're bringing them into the business really for the grunt work, the basic bookkeeping, financials, compliance work. And we're finding a lot of the millennials, when I speak at a lot of conferences and a lot of events throughout the year, the feedback that I commonly get from accountants working at accounting firms and even up to manager level is they're not satisfied in their jobs because of the type of work they're doing. So you're looking at, clients that are using offshore strategies of ours. A lot of their staff are fast tracking their careers because they're not having to do as much of the compliance and grunt work, which is really process driven. They're doing more of the reviewing. They're doing more of the client facing. They're being a lot more proactive with clients, and they're giving a lot more assistance to their clients. So we're seeing job satisfaction within our client base being a lot higher than when I go out and speak at events, and you're seeing accountants that are still being brought in and doing work that's just mundane, process driven, that could be done a lot more cost effectively and give a lot more satisfaction to your team locally. So when we're really looking at, I suppose, from a talent perspective, understanding the generation and why they think like that. So Kerry, I'm going to hand over to you, because within our business, we've got over 570 staff. There's 100 in recruiting at the moment. 70% of our staff are female, and my understanding, Kerry, is that about 80% of the numbers of our staff are in the Gen X and Gen Y. So you're responsible for this at TOA. So I'll let you talk around understanding Generation X, or particularly Y, and what's important to them.
Yeah, not a problem at all, Nick. Thanks. So I'm sure many of you out there are experiencing these kinds of issues around managing the different generations in your workforces now. And it's easy to attach labels, and I don't like to do that, but there are some distinctions to think about when you do think about the different generations within your workforce. And what we're really seeing from the millennial generation is that they have got a much stronger desire to kind of want to see the bigger picture. So they're probably not as happy to sit there and just be told what to do. They really want to understand the connection of why they're doing the things they're doing. So, in terms of onboarding and thinking about bringing offshore team members into your business, there's probably some key takeouts to think about in how you actually assimilate those people into your team, and creating connection to their personal goals and to your company goals is one really important way of doing that. So having conversations early in their hire around how they see their career progressing and how you can help them achieve some of their personal goals through the goals that your company has articulated is one way to create that kind of connection with millennials. And having really clear expectations and conversations upfront with those guys from the outset. So making sure that your business gets into a routine of having established outcome profiles. So getting everyone on the same page about what agreed KPIs are going to be, and then always linking that back to how that's helping your team members' actual personal development as well. So that's a couple of little takeouts there from me. Nick, have you got some others that you'd like to add?
Yeah, one thing that was really interesting around the outcome profiles, and for those that don't know what an outcome profile is, it's the old job description, but it's really based around, I suppose it's the next generation job description around what is it that you're actually wanting their team members to focus on, and what are the key things that they can say at the end of each day, month and year that they have achieved their job. And it links back to the values of the business, it links back into KPIs. And for any of our clients who want to discuss this further with us, please do let us know, get in contact with us, and we can certainly have a bigger conversation. But I think the days of understanding talent and the process that accountants used to go through with accounting firms is you used to start as a graduate, you'd be making the tea, you'd be doing the filing, you'd be starting in the basics, and then you'd be progressing your way through a firm up until manager level, and then if you're invited into partnership or associate level, then that would be the typical path. And it used to be that a lot of credit was given to the Big Four, that if you had the Big Four on the resume, that obviously it held better for you in the future when you're applying for other jobs. But, you know, is that still as important these days? We're seeing a lot of accounting firms fast tracking people now. So the typical graduate route where it would take 5 to 7 years to get up to a manager level, we're really seeing that changing. And we're really seeing that firms are really struggling to get their head around how do they actually map out a new team member's future, because the old path of partnership, most younger accountants don't want these days. It's easy to go and set up an accounting firm. All you need is a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection. So this is the thing that there's a lot of challenge now. You really need to map out what you're going to be doing for your team members. But the most important part that we see, where we see the most engagement with accounting firms that are industry leading, is they have a real focus and importance on why they're even in business. It's not about profit. There's a bigger purpose to the accounting firm, and we're really seeing people getting engaged in that why. And that's what's making them come to that firm, that's attracting the right talent, and it's really sticking the employees there. If you look at any of the industry leading firms out there, they don't lose their staff, they attract really quality people, and they don't need to give equity and ownership to keep and retain them. So they're really driving the importance of why they're in business and creating a culture and an environment where people want to work and stay. And they're really building into that the offshore team to really do a lot of the process driven work, so that the team in Australia can really focus on value add, client contact, and career progression for their Australian team. So we certainly see a real correlation between having an offshore team and retaining staff in Australia, both within our clients, even with firms that are not clients of ours, that we know that they have outsourcing teams that are really driving that, and it's really helping them to grow it. So managing millennials, Kerry, I'll come back to you around what's important for me, because we have seen a real, I suppose, one thing that we have seen with the younger generation with X, and more so the Y, is it is really around what's in it for them. And this really was relevant for me a couple of years ago. I was doing roundtables, as we do every quarter with our staff, just to get feedback on, you know, what's working, what's not working, what can we do as a business to improve the culture. And one of them turned around to me, he was a Generation Y, and he said, Nick, we really love being involved in TOA Global in the Philippines. We really, you know, it's exciting. It's the place to work for accountants in the Philippines. But at the end of the day, Nick, none of that matters to me. What I want to know is what's in it for me? What's my career progression going to be? So, Kerry, I'll pass over to you now, because you deal with this on a daily basis. So what are the things that, you know, tips and tricks that people can do with managing millennials, given that a lot more of it is what's in it for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think really establishing that personal connection up front with millennials and talking to them about their kind of dreams and aspirations and where they want their career to go is really important. And then being able to really clearly map out a pathway that's going to give them fulfillment around those kind of needs and desires. So millennials across the world, I don't think differ too greatly. Millennials in the context of the Filipino environment or the Australian environment are the same. So they, as Nick said, you know, they do want to know what's in it for them, and they do want to know that they're going to be progressing over a period of time. And that's where those documents that Nick has referred to, things like the outcome profiles, do become really important living documents to keep referring back to and to maintain a sense of progress for the millennials along the way. I think the other thing that's really important is being able to demonstrate the impact that they're having on your company, showing them how they're improving the Australian team's efficiencies, for example, being able to share stories company-wide, being able to recognise them for their contributions. So one of the things that we know really appeals to our workforce in the Philippines is when our clients do give them a shout out for the work that they're doing, that kind of public praise and sharing of stories, both client to employee and from a TOA perspective to our wider workforce, really engages with people and creates that sense of motivation to want to keep achieving more. So I think the sharing of stories, creating personal connections, having a really clear career plan, despite them being part of an offshore team, they're still an extension of your team. So having those really open discussions early in the piece is key to making the relationship work.
Fantastic, thanks, Kerry. One thing I'd also like to, I suppose, add in there is the whole work-life balance is probably a lot more relevant in this generation as well. The days of them wanting to come in and have to earn their stripes by doing 16 or 18-hour days, I really don't think that that's relevant moving forward. So, Kerry, what's your opinion on the whole work-life balance and trying to match that up?
Yeah, so I guess this is where there probably is a little bit of a difference between kind of the Australian and the Philippine context. Certainly, my experience with the team in the Philippines is that they do want to achieve work-life balance, that they do have lots of different interests, and that whole kind of freelancer economy is starting to burgeon in the Philippines, as we've seen in Australia. So giving them the great thing about, I think, the roles at the outsourced accountant is that our team know that we have a strong belief in work-life balance, and when we do things like engagement surveys, we know that we're delivering on that through our clients. So being able to promote that is very important. I think the other thing to mention is just around, in terms of giving them a sense of progress and achievement, is there's some things that clients can do with their offshore team as they grow the offshore team into kind of bigger teams, and by appointing team leads in your offshore team is a great way of showing them how they're progressing and how they are moving forward with their career. Giving them responsibility around subject matter expertise and project leads is also a great thing to do with them, and really developing mentor-mentee relationships across the borders is another way of creating that connection.
Yeah, fantastic. If anyone does, I'll just mention this now, I forgot to mention a bit earlier. If anyone has any questions throughout the webinar, please pop them into the question box and we'll answer them as we can. And if we don't get to them during the webinar today, we will certainly get back to you after it. So one thing I just wanted to add to that, Kerry, was that we get a lot of feedback, particularly when I'm around speaking to accounting firms locally in Australia, New Zealand, America, UK. We don't really see too much difference across countries. But the attitude of partners and owners in the past was to maximise billable hours. So they're looking at 80 to 100% of billable hours during the day, which often meant that accountants used to have to work excessive hours just to be able to achieve that, because it's not possible within the 8 hours of standard work. But we're really seeing the attitude of employees not wanting to do those hours anymore, utilising technology. So one of the frustrations I get told all the time is that staff know that technology could automate and improve the firm's processes and systems a lot more, which would mean they wouldn't have to work the hours that they currently do because the firm's processes are not efficient. So one thing that I get a lot of feedback from, particularly the accountants and managers that come to these presentations that I do, is that they don't want to be flogged and worked like they have been in the past. And we're seeing a lot more of the better firms starting to really focus on work-life balance. And what I mean by that is really focusing on making sure that their team are taking regular breaks, that they are having their holidays and they're using them, because if you're at your most refreshed and best, you're going to perform the best, instead of maximising and saying these are the only times in the year where you can take your holidays because it matches the firm's workflow. We're seeing firms that are now starting to manage their workflow as a yearly workflow, not just a seasonal, which is based around obviously tax returns. If the firms are managing their workflow properly, you're smoothing it out throughout 12 months so that you don't have those peaks and troughs anymore. So Kerry, have you got any more to add to that, I suppose, around firm expectations in the past, where it used to be really having to work to death your staff just to be able to hit your numbers, versus now it's around, I suppose, trying to manage that a lot more?
Yeah, I think, that is a clear message that we're seeing. And again, I think that's not just with millennial workforce. I think that's across the board now. And I think the pace at which technology has been moving and the speed at which especially millennials will adopt new technology will mean that there's a lot more reward than risk in introducing new technology and engaging with your team to use that technology. Their speed to acquire new skills is extremely high, and this is a point that we'll get to further down the track in terms of when you've got a list of kind of your needs for a candidate and their speed to acquire new skills. So knowing that these guys they're very bright, they are early adopters of technology and new process, they adapt well to change, and they acquire new skills fast. So they're really key takeouts to think about when you're thinking about hiring someone in that offshore context.
Brilliant. So one of the things that millennials, there's a lot of talk around, and it's a lot of negative talk around the loyalty challenge, and that the millennials, their lack of loyalty may be a sign of neglect. But really, I think that the real challenge, particularly with accountants in Australia, New Zealand, US, UK, is around their misunderstanding of millennials, and they're not truly understanding how to best manage them. And it's not, we've seen this throughout history with the different, it's called Gen X, Gen Y now. We've had these same issues in the past. They've just been managed and dealt with differently. So I think that, given that the workforce and given that growing accounting firms are going to need staff in Australia, moving forward, you really need to look at what are you doing to attract the right talent, but then more importantly, what are you doing to keep them? And a lot of that is around how do you best manage them, which is some of the things that obviously Kerry's covered off. So we're going to just quickly jump to some Deloitte data on a millennial survey that they did in 2016, which is winning over the next generation. And the one thing that I really wanted to highlight here to everyone on the webinar today is around the numbers where 66% of millennials are expecting to leave their employment. And if you're looking at the timeframes of when they are, it's really under the 5-year mark. So one of the challenges is if you do attract, and we know that attracting the right talent is one of the challenges, but then once you do get the right person, 7 out of 10 are expecting to leave you within 5 years, and a large proportion of them within 2 to 3 years. So that's where we're really, I suppose, reinforcing what do you need to do to retain the best talent, because attracting is one challenge, but then knowing that 7 out of 10 of them are going to leave you anyway within 5 years, that's the next biggest challenge, because that sort of turnover in time for training and managing is just, it's too costly and it's too hard. So we'll run another quick poll now around what's the best talent retention motivation. So in your opinion, what do you think is the best talent retention motivation? Pay rise, career advancement courses, benefits, perks, flexibility, equity sharing for ownership, or rewards or incentive programs. So we'll just run a quick poll on this. interesting stats coming up. Benefits, perks and flexibility is a big one. Pay rise is 40%, which is an interesting one. People think that just paying more is going to keep them. Interesting, 10 out of 100 people on the webinar today are saying that equity sharing is an incentive, and certainly I know that when we've been running some snap polls on the events that I run, equity is not necessarily a major motivator anymore for people. So we might just close that poll off now. Kerry, do you want to just talk a little bit around the results? So we've got 64% of people saying benefits, perks and flexibility is one of the key areas, and then the next biggest one is obviously just giving people a pay rise to try and keep them. So Kerry, what are your thoughts on the results that came through from everyone on the webinar today?
Yeah, again, I'm not surprised by these results, and certainly the shift towards benefits, perks and flexibility is very apparent from what we're seeing. People want to work for an employer that has the whole package, so they do want to be paid well for the work they're doing. They do want to have well articulated career paths. They do want to have things like employee benefits, and we know that in the context of our Filipino workforce, that's a really important part of their overall compensation and benefits package. We've recently reviewed and upgraded our medical benefits package for the team over there, and that is extremely important to them. Small things like perks, the nice things that we can do, the pizza lunch, the in-chair massage, they do provide that kind of more modern kind of feel to your workplace, and having a degree of flexibility about how they go about their work is also important. I'd say, that's probably the issue around flexibility and things like work from home is something that's probably more noticeable in the Australian context at this point in time than the Filipino context. But equally, pay is certainly a key driver for our Filipino workforce. It is an emerging economy. There is the talent market is accelerating quickly, so pay will be an important aspect of their decision making. So it is one to be mindful of, and would agree with you, Nick, that things like equity sharing are probably on the lower side as these results are reflecting. So I think, rewards and incentive programs, can't underestimate the impact of the simple things that both client and as a business like we are can do in that space. So those don't need to be things that cost a lot of money. The building, I guess, a culture of gratitude and recognition is something that we strongly believe in and try to do on a daily basis, and encourage our clients to do with their offshore teams. So yeah, that would be my overall comments of the poll coming through.
Excellent, thanks, Kerry. One interesting thing, or some real interesting things that came from, we just recently did a client roadshow around the country, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Brisbane, where we had all of our clients come together for some peer learning. But one of the big things that really came out is that a lot of accounting firms don't have a structured culture program. So there's nothing that they do on a structured process to really build the culture that they're wanting to design. And a lot of that came back to benefits, perks and flexibilities. A lot of firms don't have policies for these types of things. It's literally, a lot of it's focused around pay. There's very little around career advancement. And there's very little structured things done. When I asked all of the attendees, and this is something, again, we surveyed at all of the events around, do they know all of their staff's wedding anniversaries, birthdays, kids' birthdays? A lot of the cultural stuff, a lot of them had no idea. So a lot of it, while you can provide the best benefits, perks, flexibility, and you can pay the best, you're not necessarily going to be retaining the right staff if you don't have the rest of the culture in place. And there's lots of material out there. I know Tristan White has written a book, Culture is Everything. It's very structured around, putting in a process to basically build your culture. Kerry, any more that you would want to add around, building the culture part of it?
Yeah, I think in the context of millennials especially, you know, those guys are looking for more out of their employers these days than perhaps Gen X and the baby boomers before that, in terms of the kind of contribution they're making, an employer is making in their local communities or to society. So whether that's partnering with charities or organisations, launching strategies that impact your local environment. They're the kinds of initiatives that millennials are really looking for when they're making decisions about their employer these days. So from a local context for the outsourced accountant in the Philippines, we've recently partnered with a fantastic organisation in both our major site, Clark and Manila, called the Tuloy Foundation, and they're a great foundation that provides residents schooling, education, and health for displaced children aged between 4 and 14 in the Philippines. And the take-up rate of our employees wanting to engage and help and volunteer time or financial donations or whatever it might be has been really quite overwhelming. So I think being mindful of those kinds of connections as well as some of those kind of really tangible employer kind of benefits is the other thing that I would really promote with organisations.
And Kerry, I think that really links back into your values and the culture you're trying to create and making, I mean, ours is certainly making a bigger impact into the communities we operate, and that the charity work that we do is, we get really high engagement and we do attract staff because of that. I'll just jump into some quick questions that have come through. Trevor made a comment here saying benefits and perks have become a right very quickly. Then they leave because they're worth more than what you pay them. And it's very true, Trevor, but one of the challenges is I suppose, is creating an environment where people don't want to leave. When we certainly survey all of our staff, while money is one of their top 3 priorities, it's not their only driver for wanting to stay at a workplace. And if they can see the career advancement and they can see that as they grow that they will be obviously earning more as well, there's more likelihood that they will stay. There's another one that's come through here, Kerry, which I'll jump to you. So Rachel, thanks for asking the question, but Rachel's question was, Kerry, what's the usual reason for employee turnover in the Philippines and how is this addressed?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. Thanks, Rachel. To be completely honest, it really varies. A lot of our team will leave us because of some family responsibilities. So the concept, I think, of family and connection to family is still, whilst it's a very important feature of Western society, you do see that play out in a much stronger way in the Philippines. The war for talent is pretty fierce. The talent, the desire for professional people is on the rise. So it is a competitive market. So we do need to be mindful of comp and ben packages. So that can be another reason. And other reasons are generally that they may be moving away from a particular area. So they might be relocating to another part of the Philippines will also be another driver for employee turnover. I think the other thing to be mindful of is also what was the connection that they had with their client. So that whole the experience of onboarding that team member and having great rhythms around how you communicate and how well you integrate them into your team would also play into people's decision making in that regard.
Yeah, definitely, Kerry. And I think that's one thing that we really see on a daily basis is that the clients that are really engaging their global workforce or their offshore team that are with us and making them feel as part of their culture and building a culture in the Philippines that is part of their Australian culture or US team's culture, they're the ones that are really winning at retention. The clients that don't communicate as frequently, don't treat them like a typical employee based in their country of where they operate. We're seeing that those teams have a higher turnover rate than the ones that are really engaging and building a culture that is just one culture. It's just a global workforce. So I think that's a really interesting one. John's asked a question, Kerry. Is there a difference between managing millennials from Australia and the Philippines?
Good question, and I don't think there's a great difference at all. I think, you know, again, there may be some nuances between that kind of Western culture and what we see in the Philippines, where I think, you know, you do hear people talk about this entitlement mentality that might be growing in the Australian workforce. I don't think you see that as starkly with the Filipino workforce, but I think, you know, there's some of the myths and the negative things that come through about millennial workforces. I think some of the things that we've just touched on today about millennials having very similar drivers around career progression, knowing how they're making an impact, feeling connected, they're the important things to focus on.
Yeah, fantastic. So we might just move on, Kerry, to your tips and tricks around managing an offshore team. So do you want to give us some tips around how our clients that are making it work are doing it? And for those that are on the call that are either looking at building an offshore team or have one but are not really nailing it yet, what are some of the things that they can do to really engage and build their offshore team to get the career progression for their team, but also the culture that they're wanting to build?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we've got some points up there. Appoint a champion. So, really important to have strong points of contact at both locations, and for those points of contacts to have really regular rhythms of communications, and to know how they can reach out and the levels of empowerment they have in the offshore location to be able to make decisions and to kind of steer the team at the local level. Nick's mentioned it already around, you know, the offshore team is an extension of your local team. So if we're in a local office, we come in every morning, we have our rituals around saying good morning, talking about our weekends, and, you know, that should still happen as much as it can with your offshore team. So the guys are all connected via Skype. Technology does make the world a lot smaller. So, you know, it's not just a plug and play kind of situation here. There is effort that needs to be taken for all of those social rituals to be carried out as you would your onshore team with your offshore team. If we flick ahead a slide, some other points that I would make are just around really managing the expectations of your team. So we've touched on those outcome profiles and having clear KPIs for both the local and offshore teams. The other thing I'd mention just there is making sure that both teams know how how those KPIs connect with each other. So, you know, that the performance of my duties in this location is going to impact the performance of your duties. And so being able to demonstrate to the teams that the efforts that they're making are both equally important and will have an impact on the overall company performance. Creating regular meetings is another really important tip. So, you know, ideally, you should be having one-on-ones and weekly team meetings, and preferably they should always be via a Skype call, have some face-to-face interaction. And then I think, you know, spend some time working on communication styles, make sure that you kind of do have an understanding that there are cultural nuances between an Australian, New Zealand, US and Filipino style of work. The Filipinos can tend to be a little less boisterous than us Aussies. It might take a little bit more teasing to get feedback and get their input, but it's well worth the effort. Even in recent team building events that we've run in the Philippines, when the executive team will get up and do a Q&A session with our teams, they can be quite slow to start asking questions, but once they're in their comfort zone, you know, they they're really committed and ask lots of good questions to the point where we have to kind of cut things short. But I think it's important to make sure that you are actively engaging them for their input and for their feedback. That is one thing I think I have seen come out in some of our exit surveys with employees, is not feeling like they were empowered to offer suggestions and feedback. So working on making sure that you do give them avenues to offer up their suggestions and feedback is another really important way of engaging with them. And, you know, there's all sorts of platforms and technologies and things out there that are available for our use for garnering that kind of feedback these days too. So if anyone did have questions about that, be more than willing to take those on board as well.
Excellent, and certainly from the feedback we got around from the roadshows that we've recently completed around the country, it really surprises me how firms locally in Australia have the frequency of meetings that they have is infrequent. A lot of the feedback we got was we really don't hold daily huddles. We don't have structured meeting agendas. We don't have structured meeting rhythms. And if you're wanting to learn more about this, Vern Harnish's Scaling Up is one of the philosophies that we follow at the Outsourced Accountant. It's one of many different philosophies, so it's not the only one. But I strongly urge firms, whether you're looking at your local team or your offshore team, having a real structured communication method, structured meetings with strict agendas, and really building a culture of success and achievement. And this comes only when you actually communicate with your team. It surprised me all the time how little firms communicate. And I think it's one of the biggest things that firms can work on. So Kerry, we're just going to jump into quickly before we finish up today, retention and attraction working examples. So we've got a couple of slides we're going to run through. So do you want to just run through some of the solutions that firms can do to retain talent and attract the right talent, and even just discuss a little bit around what are we doing at the Outsourced Accountant to work on these as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in today's employment market, retaining employees has to be a priority for every company. Every employee, and especially every high-performing employee that we lose out of a business is, you know, a big missed opportunity. And so making sure that you've got transparency and structure around your REM and benefits program is an obvious one. Making sure that you're giving people diversity of tasks and that you're allowing them to step up and learn higher level work is really important. Important that is technical kind of work, but also really important. We're seeing that millennials and everyone really wants to be able to develop those leadership and softer skills. So being able to step people up to give them exposure to those kinds of skills is a really important thing. So in terms of what we're doing on the ground in the Philippines, we make sure that we do have a program of engagement activities that drive connection between people. So, you know, the Filipino workforce is quite different in the fact that we get a very high referral of employees coming to us from people already working in the business, and you see these kind of tribes almost moving from school to university into workplaces, and they're very connected. And so being able to promote our workplaces, them being able to promote our workplace as a great place to work is a really strategic advantage for us from a recruitment perspective. We spend a lot of time and effort internally in the learning and development space, so making sure that we do have professional development programs available. We're partnering with the professional body in the Philippines called PICPA at the moment to ensure that our team can earn CPD points. And another great incentive for our team based over there is the opportunity to visit our clients, whether they're in Australia or New Zealand, wherever they might be. But that's obviously great exposure for our team members, and they also absolutely love getting visits from their clients to their local location to be able to showcase their local cultures and life where they're living. So The last point there is just assigning local champions to lead your offshore team, which we've kind of gone into. In terms of the leadership training, we do offer both technical and leadership training courses, so that is an advantage. And they're not courses that need to go for days and days. We do kind of short courses. They might only have to take a couple of hours, so we're not pulling people away for long periods of time. In terms of empowering people, we've touched on the communication rhythms. Important that you do involve them in things like your strategic planning sessions, and from a TOA internal point of view for our support team, the exec team puts a lot of effort in making sure the local leadership team on the ground in the Philippines is a big part of our local strategic planning sessions. And we've also touched on those kind of charity and more community-oriented events today. So that's kind of picking up on those ones. Then in terms of the need for flexibility, accountability and trust, the option to work remotely is becoming an everyday part of life in the Western world. The way that translates in our environment is a strong focus on work-life balance, and the fact that in the context of a lot of the Philippines, people would be working 6-day weeks and extremely long work days. So when people come to work at the outsourced accountant, they know they've got a work day that is managed in the main between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. their time, and that is a huge draw card for us. And then making sure that personal and company values are aligned. We're about to relaunch our outsourced accountant values, and we've gone through a very consultative process with our workforce to make sure that the values that we're going to launch really resonate with the workforce. So that Refer a Mate program is what I mentioned earlier about seeing kind of these teams of people that have spent many years during their schooling life coming together and working in their adult career life as well, which is a really great way of building a really closely connected workforce. And so they're kind of our top tips around retention and attraction.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kerry. So if anyone has any final questions, we are going to be wrapping up very soon. So if anyone has any final questions, please send them through to us and we'll either answer them before we end the webinar, or we will certainly answer them after. So we're just going to talk around some of the basic roles that we do provide in an offshore environment, because a lot of questions that we do get from prospective clients is what type of roles can you have offshore? And the easy answer is that anything other than something that requires a physical presence in front of a client. Simple, basic process-based tasks, bookkeeping, reconciliation, reviewing accounts, reporting, administration support, client support, appointment setters, virtual assistants, right up through to marketing roles. Advanced roles, we've got clients that are doing all sorts of work over there: advisory work, liquidation work, bookkeeping, financial statements, full tax returns, in the financial planning space, paraplanning, management reporting, business advisory reporting. The roles are endless. So the easy answer is that it's more around what are the roles that you have within your firm, the processes that you have, and what are the right people doing the right task for your firm. Some of that will be offshore, some of it will certainly be always retained locally. So as always, thank you for your time this month. That is the conclusion of our webinar. I'd like to thank Kerry for all of her inputs today. We certainly are on a daily basis working through a lot of these. So thank you, Kerry, for all of the tips and tricks you gave us today. If anyone does have any questions I'd like to ask, please feel free to get in contact with us, with any of our local relationship managers, or leave a note in the question box and we'll be in touch. So thank you again. Keep an eye out for next month's webinar. We do run these on a monthly basis. And if you're not able to attend on the date, let us know and we will certainly send you the presentation. So thank you again for your time. Thank you again, Kerry, and we look forward to serving you with your offshore needs in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.